Hello and welcome to this air dry clay tutorial. In this tutorial I will show you how to create different foods using air dry clay, and I will give you more information about the characteristics of air dry clay, about different techniques of creation of miniature food creation, and I will show you what tools you can use and how to use them, and also I'll give you information on your studio, on the desk that you will use to create your miniature foods, and I'll show you practically how to create some of these foods. And let's talk in this lesson a little bit about different types of clay that you can buy. I have here some examples of clay. On the one hand, there is the polymer clay, for example the Fimo here, which is in different colors, or the Artex. These are some famous types of polymer clay, and their main characteristic is that they have to be put into the oven in order to harden, and they can be used for all sorts of items such as jewelry. You can make miniature foods out of it. You can shape them in any way you like, and they simply have to be put in the oven in order to dry. Another type of clay that does not need being put in the oven is the air dry clay, and it can be either white or terracotta as colors, and the white type can be painted in different colors, so it's very useful if you want to make, for example, jewelry or food items, miniature food items, and you simply have to let the item dry, and in order to prevent cracks you can make a mixture of clay and water and cover the entire surface of the item again with this mixture of clay and water, which will fill in all the cracks in the item if any cracks appeared. And a third type of clay that I wanted to show you is also an air dry clay. It is the ultra light clay. As you can see, it has very intense colors, very saturated colors, and its characteristic is that it's very light, and it is a type of paper clay, and you can make different items out of this type of clay. One of its characteristics is that it dries pretty quickly, so you should not keep it for a very long time in the air because it might dry out while you are creating the items. So these are some types of clay that I wanted to show you that are available to buy and that you can use if you want to create clay items. Of course, their characteristics differ. The ones that are heated in the oven will be harder and they will be more resistant, whereas the ones that are air dry are less resistant to water, so that they should be made waterproof in different ways. For example, you can, if you use the dust clay, you can cover the entire surface with a brush with acrylic gloss, with an acrylic gloss medium, or with PVA glue and water, and this will make the surface more watertight. And then you can also apply acrylic paint. let's talk a little bit about the ultra light clay. This type of clay is paper clay. As the name suggests, this type of clay is very light and it's very sticky as well. You have to take this into consideration when you create your items. And another characteristic of this clay is the fact that if you combine different pieces of this clay, if you cut it, the cut will be very clean and there will be no color mixture. At the same time, this type of clay is very sensitive to water, so even if it has dried, if it comes into contact with water again, it will lose its shape. It will become humid and lose its shape. If you create, if you want to use a color that you do not have in these bags, you can simply take different colors and mix them together in order to obtain the color that you like. Of course, you can also use soft pastels to give certain colors to the objects that you create, and you can also use acrylic paint for that. The resulted objects will be very light because the clay itself is very light, and it will have generally these bright colors because this is the way the colors are in the bag. But if you create color combinations, you can also obtain other colors that are not necessarily so saturated as these. Let's continue by talking a little bit about your clay working table. You probably have a polymer clay studio prepared in one of your rooms, where you have a table and a place where you can put your clay and your tools and everything that you need for modeling. So in this studio, you probably need to make your clay on a specific surface that protects your table and protects your clothing, your furniture from getting stained because of the clay. So I have here some items that you can use as your working surface. You can use, for example, a plastic sheet like this, which is very easy to clean, and it also protects the table from getting stained from the clay that you use. Or alternatively, you can use a cutting board like this. I prefer a plastic cutting board for the same reason, because it protects your table and it is also very easy to clean. As you know, the air dry clay is very easy to clean with water, so whenever you want to clean the surfaces, you can take a bowl of water and clean the surfaces carefully and then use a tissue to dry them out. While you are working, you can also have some tissues around because you might want to clean the table or to clean your hands. It's very important before you start working to wash your hands carefully and to also wash and dry out the surface you are working on very carefully. And that is because you do not want dust or dirt to get imprinted into the clay, because it will give an inesthetic aspect to the items that you create. If you want to be sure that your hands do not imprint dirt into the items that you create, you can also use a pair of gloves. After you have finished working, if there are traces of clay left, you can also use a scraper, like this plastic scraper, which is very light and it can be used very well on a plastic surface because it doesn't scratch. If you would use a metal scraper, it might perhaps scratch the surface, but a plastic scraper cleans the surface very well and it also does not scratch. And then you can clean the surface with water and dry it out. Now let's talk a little bit about the tools, the molds, the colors that we are going to use when we create our clay items. You can see here different items that can be used for creating the clay items, like for example these molds. I have here different types of molds. So this is a plastic, a soft gum mold, and these are some hard plastic molds. You can use those molds if you want to create a specific type of food item, or a specific item, a specific shape. And one detail that I can add regarding these molds: if you want to prevent your clay from sticking to the mold, you can put some flour on the surface of the mold, and that will make the shape that you have created not stick to this mold, so it will be easier to remove. Now let's continue. We can use these cutters in order to create different shapes. And one detail that I would like to mention is that in order to prevent the clay from sticking to this cutter, you can put a plastic sheet like this. So you can use this type of plastic sheet, and you can put this plastic sheet on the item that you want, on the clay, and then you put the cutter and you cut through this plastic sheet. This way the clay will not stick to your mold, and it will also be easier to remove, because once you have removed the plastic, the shape will be clearly defined, the shape of your clay. Now let's put away the cutters and let's continue by talking about other items. So if you want to put, for example, cream on your the cookies that you create, you can use those items. They have different shapes, and you can ornate the cookies using these items. Now let's continue talking about the colors. As you can see here, I have some soft pastels. The colors are very intense, and you can use those pastels by simply scratching their surface with a cutter, and they look a bit like chalk, so you will obtain dust, and you will be able to take the dust that you have obtained by scratching those pastels and put it on a brush like this, and then add it to the items that you have created out of clay. So you can use these colors to paint your clay. Another type of colors that you can use are the acrylic colors, and they can be added to your clay to give a certain color to the clay that you're using. And now let's talk about the tools that I use when I make my clay miniature food items. For example, this one is an item that I use very often. It is a roller, and I use it in order to flatten the clay. After I made a flat surface of clay, I will probably need to cut it. So I use different types of blades for that. For example, if I want to remove the clay from the surface I've been working on, I will use this type of blade to remove the item from the table, from the surface I've been working on. You can also use this cutting blade to cut pieces of the clay, to create different shapes. If you want to cut little bits out of the items that you create, you can use this blade. You just have to be very careful because these blades are very sharp, so you must be careful not to injure yourself. There are also other types of cutters, as you can see here, which are very practical. Their shapes make them be very practical for use. And as I mentioned, be very careful because the surface is very, the blade is very sharp. So if you want to create different shapes in your clay, you can also use this type of tools. These are made of plastic, and the advantage is that they are not sharp. And now let's talk a little bit about the molds and about the different tools that you can use for your creations, for your clay creations. And also let's talk about the colors. Let's begin with the molds. I have here a few types of molds. This is soft gum mold, and these are made of hard plastic. These are just some examples of molds that you can use when you want to make items out of soft clay. And as a detail that I would like to mention regarding these molds, if you put your clay here and you worry that it might stick to the surface of the mold, you can put some flour into the mold, and this way you will be sure that the shape that you have created out of clay will be easy to remove. Now let's continue talking about these items here. So as you can see, they have different shapes, and you can create with them the ornaments of your cakes. So if you want to put cream on a cake that you have created, you can use these items to put the cream on top of the cake. You can use these cutters. Of course, there are different cutters in different sizes, and they have different shapes. And you can create different shapes out of your clay using these cutters. When you use these cutters, in order to prevent the clay from sticking to the cutter, you can use plastic foil like this, and put it on the clay. So you put it simply over the clay, and then you cut with your cutter. This way the clay will be prevented from sticking to your cutter, and also once you have lifted the plastic foil, the shape of the clay that you have cut will be very clearly defined. Now let's put these away and continue talking about other items. Now I have these pastels here. These are the soft pastels that I use for my clay items, to put color on the clay items. And as you can see, they look like chalk, and they have very saturated colors. And if you want to put a certain color on your clay creation, you simply take one of those pieces of soft pastel and you scratch off the surface of the soft pastel some of this chalk, and you'll have a fine dust in this color. And with a brush you take the dust and you put it on the items that you have created. And this is how you can paint your clay items. Another type of colors that you can use are these acrylic colors, which are liquid, and you can put some of this color and mix it with the clay that you are shaping. Now, regarding the shaping of your clay, you can also use the roller. In fact, you will need this roller very often because you can make your clay flat using this roller. So it can be in different, it looks in different ways. You can find a roller as a transparent bar, or you can make your own roller from a tube like this one. Now let's continue with the to talk about the tools. Here I have several different tools made of plastic, and as you can see they have different shapes. Some of them are rounded at the end, some of them have a zigzag at the end, like this one or like this one. Some are pointed. The advantage of these plastic tools is that they can be washed very easily, and they do not oxidize. For example, the blade is already rusty because of washing, or as the plastic items do not become rusty, and also they are not sharp, so you cannot scratch or cut your skin with them, and also they are easy to wash, and they are also inexpensive. They are quite inexpensive items to buy, and they are practical because they have all these shapes, and you can use those all these shapes in order to model your clay. By comparison, there are also metal items, for example these cutters. So these cutters have different shapes, so you can create different shapes in your clay. And what you have to be careful about is the fact that they are very sharp, so you must be careful not to scratch or cut yourself. And another type of metal tool is the blade, the metal blade, that I use both for cutting the clay and also from removing it from the table, from the surface on which I have modeled it. So it's very practical, and also you have to be very careful because it's very sharp, but you can make a very precise cut with the blade because it's very thin and it's also very sharp, so it's very practical to have this blade. In fact, you will use very often these two items, the roller and the blade. I think they are the items that you will use the most. Now let's see other items that I use. I have here some metal items that I use for my clay foods that I create. And they are very practical because they have these pointed parts here. For small items, for small bits of clay, for example, you can use the pincers. And also for sculpting, you can use these items that are made especially for sculpting, and they are very practical. And another type of item that I use, especially when I want to create a loaf of bread, or when I want to create a cake. In order to create a surface of the cake, I use either a toothbrush or the aluminum foil, which is rolled like this. So I simply put it on the surface of the loaf of bread that I want to create, and it gives a shape that is similar to the shape of a loaf of bread, that irregular shape. And I can also use sandpaper for that, because it also has an irregular form. So if I put it on the surface of the bread that I want to create, it will give the surface a surface similar to the rough surface of the sandpaper. So these are some of the items that I wanted to show you, which are very practical for creating different foods and other items out of clay. And you can use them to either to paint your clay creations, or to create different shapes. You can create different shapes with the tools or with the molds, and then you can paint them. Let's make a fried egg using white and yellow clay. So I will first take the white clay and create the egg. Like this. And now I will take the yellow clay like this. And now let's create the edges. Like this. Let's see from a closer distance. And now I will use color And I will use the pastels to create the edges of the fried egg. First of all, I will use some orange. Let's put the orange here. And I will also use brown. And now let's add some shine to the egg. Like this. And now the egg is ready. Cutter and remove the egg from the surface. And this is the finished egg. The fried egg. Now let's create a macaron. I'll cut it in two and I'll create two small balls of clay. And I will press. Now let's take the second one and I'll press on it. And now I will take the cutter and first of all create the margin of the macaron. And now let's use the cutter to make this margin. Now let's lift the macaron. Let's put it away, the first macaron. Let's take the second one and do the same. First of all, I'll create the margin. And now that I've created this margin, I will use the other cutter to make the texture of this margin, of this edge. This way. And now I have made the two parts of the macaron, and I will add the cream inside. For that I will take some light pink clay, and now I will use the roller to flatten it. Now let's flatten the and now I will put the clay, the light pink clay, inside the macaron like this. And I'll put the other half of the macaron this way. And the macaron is ready. And this is the finished macaron. So this is what the finished macaron looks like. Let's make a bread roll, a small loaf of bread. I will use for that the white clay, like this. And now let's create some texture. I will use the toothbrush to create the texture of the bread. And now let's use some sandpaper, because it has a coarse surface and it gives a coarse aspect to the bread. And now I will try to cut a bit of this bread and let's use yellow or orange pastel as well as brown pastel for the surface of the bread. Let's put some yellow as well. And some brown. Let's put some more brown pastel. And again, let's make the surface of the bread. And now let's create the texture of the bread. And now that we have created the loaf of bread, now let's add some white pastel. This is the finished roll of bread.